Welcome. I'm glad you guys are here.
I
Hi.
feel attacked.
Mm-hmm.
Calling me out.
What?
What? Wait, what?
He didn't believe in me.
What?
It's because I called him.
Hey, man.
Hey, remember the last times that you you kind of woke up?
He called me too.
I got up early.
If that makes you feel any better.
It better be
better. He doesn't call me.
Usually it's because I have to poop.
Usually.
Alright. Welcome. Despite the harsh weather, most of you guys got here on time. About 50%.
I got it.
One's missing, but that's okay. You're just gonna miss the lesson. Yeah, so I have to leave at 11 o'clock. Just gonna do the lesson and I'm dipping. Because I don't want to be here.
Same.
Honestly, this kind of weather.
Anyways, let us begin with a prayer. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I'm thankful for my dad being alive. And Lord, even though today is a bit weird with this terrible weather, rain, heavy winds, Lord, I'm glad that we're able to come here and just carve a little bit of our time out of our day to just get to know more about you and read your word, Lord. I pray that your spirit is with us today as we discuss and get to know you a little bit more. And God, pray for my father's surgery, which may have happened already or may happen soon. Time will only tell. And Lord, I just pray that you're with him and that you can, Lord, just lift up all our worries and burdens. Hope that I can see the outcome of this and see what you have planned for this circumstance. Lord, just be with us as we go through 2 Thessalonians. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right, Thessalonians, not Thessalonians.
So, we're in 2 Thessalonians. I prepared the best I can with whatever amount of time I had. So, we'll see what happens. So, last week, Stephen taught on chapter 2. And he kind of left it on such a kind of sad note, knowing that there's now this Antichrist that's going to come. You know, that's not exactly always a happy note or a positive thing.
Yep.
So,
What?
The Antichrist.
Antichrist?
Yeah,
Right.
he's gonna come before the
you okay
Jesus
there?
is
Sad
coming.
note.
yeah, it's a shame that this is going to happen. But I think there's always good that comes out of it. Or there's a better message to come. Because, I think Paul is always the ones that, he's always saying, hey, guys, let's praise God. And I hope that you guys are doing well. He's always the positive one, and he always gives sort of encouragement notes. And so, to follow up Stephen's teaching on the end of the world, Paul will try to encourage us in the next few bits of his letter. So, Paul starts off with saying, "But we ought to always thank God for you, brothers and sisters, loved by the Lord, because God chose you as first fruits to be saved through the sanctifying work of the Spirit and through belief in the truth." So, like I was saying, Paul always brings it back, and he always tries to encourage his people, these Christians. He says, always to thank God for you. So he's always thankful that they're still there, and of course all the praise goes to God. And so he also specifies that this topic that we'll be talking about is for Christians. He says to the brothers and sisters loved by God. So he continues to say, God chose you as first fruits to be saved through the sanctifying work. So this is going to be a big portion of our lesson today. It's going to be on how God chooses you to be first fruits. There's actually a little bit of a, I guess, background to why he used first fruits, or why the words first fruits were used. So, if you look at the footnote, it actually says first fruits can be swapped out for because from the beginning God chose you. All right. So we'll be focusing more on that, and it all comes back to, like, I guess, was this Greek, Hebrew, whatever it is. The word is the same written out, but the saying is different, so it's interpreted differently from first fruits to from the beginning. God has chosen, and so we'll have a discussion on predestination.
Oh.
So I want to, before we start the discussion, I want to have some disclaimers that predestination doesn't completely apply to those that are already believing. At least, in my opinion, I don't think it applies to those that are already believing. So this doesn't have to. So if you are already a believer and you already have faith, predestination should not apply to you because it's not as important to your faith. Because you already believe, you already have salvation. So no matter where you stand in your stance with predestination, you are already saved, and the stance only enhances maybe your argument for Christ if you're talking to non-believers. Okay, so that's point number one before we get started on predestination. Yeah, I don't think there are any further points. So it's just like a disclaimer. And I think the stance that we want to take for this is whether or not predestination is true and whether or not it is a thing that the Bible calls us to or is stating, right? So this discussion will be based on the fact that predestination is a thing in the Bible and God does predestine us, okay? And if you want some proofs of that, there are a couple of verses, like John 15:16. You don't have to go to that. I'm just gonna list out verses that you might want to write down if you guys are interested in why predestination is true. But we're gonna come into this assuming that predestination is true. Predestination, John 15:16, 17:6. Ephesians 1:4 and Ephesians 2:10. And Matthew 22, 1-14, but specifically Matthew 22:14. I think this one is on the bride.
Matthew 22, 1-14.
22:14. But if you want the whole chunk, it's 1-14. Okay. So, we'll be talking about predestination. So right off the bat, what is predestination? What do you guys think?
It's predestination.
Okay.
So basically, your end is already determined
Okay.
beforehand.
Yeah. Any other input?
Oh, and in the middle of it, so I said the end is already determined beforehand, and in between, that's nasty. I think it's predeterminism instead of predestination, because it has already been planned about what you are determined to do.
Sure. Okay. All right. Yeah. So if we're just going off of definition, what he said is mostly correct, but he forgot the God part. So
just the
so predestination, the definition, right, is everything including salvation is foreordained, and a different word for foreordained is appointed beforehand by God.
Everything including salvation is already appointed by God?
Beforehand by God.
Okay.
So yes, there is a certain determination or determinism in that. So if we bring up the fact that everything is already appointed by God beforehand, then in these verses that you may or may not search up later on. But God says that He chooses people for salvation, right? So, how does God choose? I think would be the next logical question, right? So, I guess in your own knowledge, what do you guys think that means? Like, how do you guys think God chooses?
Well, I mean, I don't think we can know whoever He chooses. Whoever He chooses is, I mean, we will know by the time we see the fruits of the person that He is working through, the fruits that they produce.
Mhm.
But other than that,
Okay.
I don't think we can determine who is going to be the one God chooses.
Sure. Hi.
Can you explain to me why this predeterminism
Mhm.
is or it's actually what God has intended? Because I don't see, I don't agree with it. I'm like, I don't see how it could work with God's first gift of freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, so how does it work, right? Actually, great segue.
Oh,
That's why I have
snap!
this here, right?
Whoa, let's get it.
So the reason. So
Okay.
your concern is with free will, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And how does predestination, sort of work with free will, right? Or how does it not work with free will, right? So there are two schools of, or mainly two schools of thought. At least that I will be bringing up today.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, goodbye marker. Calvin cycle?
Oh,
Calvin.
Calvinism. Okay.
I thought that was the baddie one.
The Arminianism?
You know, I don't realize how bad my eyesight until I realize
So
I
can't read that?
barely read it.
Oh, so-
shoot.
I can barely read it.
Anyways, so the two schools of thought, right? And if you're concerned with free will, then you probably don't like this school of thought.
Yeah, I don't like that.
And you probably like that one more.
I don't know what that is.
Okay, well, that's why we have this topic. Alright? So,
Tell me what I am.
Dirty.
yeah, I only categorize it as two. But the thing is, predestination is. The problem with predestination is that there's different ways to interpret it. If you look at that, and you look at that, there's actually. So, this is basically the two ends of the spectrum. One is it's only God. He only determines everything. And we don't really get a free will, right?
Mhm.
Or there's no like free will as in like you can't choose everything and anything, right? And I'll explain a little bit about what that free will is. Arminian is you're basically free for anything. You could choose and decide on anything, right? And that's a basic like idea around it. Yes.
So in my head, I think I'm pretty. I like that one better,
Mhm.
Arminianism. So in my head, I'm like,
Destination or
predestination doesn't really make quite that much sense if you say that God gave you free will,
Mm-hmm.
but then He has already chosen your path
Mhm.
in life to pick Him, and also to be used like almost authoritarian
Mm-hmm.
in the I don't know
Authoritative.
authoritative
Authoritatively.
like your entire essence of life on earth is to be used word by word, action by action, to God.
Mm-hmm.
Because then, what difference are you from like a bot?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
I have some on that. So, I know you have some time left, but so I was just thinking about it. So you know how we're all born with the sinful nature, the ability to conceive sin.
Mm-hmm.
So in the same way, I was just thinking, it says that God knows what you're gonna do, assuming that He knows what your ability to do and what you choose to act on is done, right? So we can't, when we sin, we can't say God made us sin. It's us. So I think in a similar fashion that the stuff that we choose to do, he knew beforehand, but he didn't force us.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Oh, great, this guy.
But no, I'm just,
Okay.
because you didn't. I was letting you prove your point, but I didn't finish.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. No, my bad.
No, because then on top of that point, it's like, if you do believe in Calvinism, whatever,
Mhm.
that once you believe in God and you give yourself up to God and do whatever He says, you're still in life sinning.
Mhm.
And so does that mean that God is intentionally purposefully making you sin? That doesn't quite logically
Mhm.
add up. And then I think the reason why I like that one is the way I see life with Christ is when you're born and you accept Christ, you accept the spiritual gifts that He's given you and all the gifts that He's allowed and the strengths that He's given you to sort of build God's kingdom and worship Him.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's like everyone has a different set of tools that God has given them, and He has sent them off into the world and given them choices, and whether or not we ourselves choose to accept God's gift and choose Him
Mhm.
is on our own. And so by that logic, I don't think the predeterminism really makes much sense
Hmm.
in that aspect, unless you tell me otherwise.
He's gonna tell you
Yeah.
otherwise.
Okay.
I
Yes.
will. I'm a. So I was reading Isaac's paper. I don't know
Oh,
if you
yeah,
read
yeah,
it.
The free will.
Yeah.
I was going to read it.
Yeah. So I'm gonna try to reiterate in the best way I can, and the less plagiarized way possible. If I remember reading it correctly, it was we were given. So it was because we were given free will, we also choose if we want to follow God or not, right?
Mhm.
So the nature of sin is only it's inherent to us because that's what comes with free will. We get the option of choosing whether we want to be God's vessels or whether we want to live in a sinful nature for the rest of our lives, right? Because I'll come back to that on another note. I forgot what I was gonna say.
Okay. So with Stephen's point, I want to say that so to a certain point that does make logical sense, and for the longest time, right, or at least until like a few nights ago, I was pretty Calvinistic, right? Because I just if God is all powerful, then we should be okay with Him choosing our will, right? And I really don't care about free will. Like if he is good, and because of where I'm at right now, right? Because it seems as if He chose me to be saved, right? Then I'm good. I'm already in heaven, right? So I don't really need free will. But reading more into it. So Arminian, you're more Arminian, right? And you're a little bit Calvinistic.
Thanks.
But the problem is this is actually not even the end of the spectrum, right? There's even more.
What?
So there's even a harder Calvinistic. So Calvinism is actually not completely full determinism. There's actually a little bit of free will in there, right? I'm not gonna try to convert you guys to Calvinism or Arminianism or Arminian view, but I'm just gonna point out some of the characteristics of each, right? And even the things that I will be pointing out and the things that I will be talking about won't fully represent the whole, I guess, stance. Okay. So your point on why, even though we sin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though we sin, what was it? Even though we sin.
So we can't. So if you believe that once you believe in God, once you believe in Jesus and salvation, and you believe that you're saved, you can't just say that God has complete 100% control of your life if you still sin, because then it's saying that God is making you sin.
Yeah. So there's so I was reading up on it, and that was mentioned. There was a point where you do still sin, and there are sinners in the world, right? And that also brings up the point. So does God allow the sinners to continue to sin, right? So where does the fault lie? The fault doesn't lie on the people that are sinning, because if it's something called hard determinism. So it's past this. So you're completely it's just all God, right? If you continue to sin, it's God's fault because He's allowing you to sin, right? And I think the argument they used was, Jackie was about to bring it up, or he brought it up, It's the fact that we still have a sinful nature, and it's this this idea of original sin, right? The sin that Adam and Eve pretty much brought upon all of us. That's what's causing us to sin. And so the fault doesn't completely lie on God, and instead it's on the original sin. I don't know how. I was reading it and I was like, I mean, it makes sense a little bit, but I didn't go too deep into it.
Wait, repeat that point.
So, the fault doesn't lie on God for allowing you to sin, but instead the fault still lies on this idea of original sin, that you sin. And let me further emphasize the point that Calvinism isn't hard determinism, which means that it isn't just all God. So there's still a little bit of free will, and this free will is not dependent on things like your own choice, right? So this free will is dependent on things like if let's say you have a really bad addiction, right? Let's say you have addiction to games, right? And so what causes you to do, let's say, your homework or play games, right? This addiction is the cause of why you are playing games instead of doing homework, right? And so so the idea they bring up is your free will in Calvinism is determined to a certain extent. It's determined based on all your circumstances in life. So all the conditions that already happened. So so why it's called determinism is because everything in nature is already planned out, right? All the forces, all the things, right? And even the point in your life is already planned out. Depending on the problem with this point is that it's dependent on something. We don't know what, right? It could be God. It could be God that planned everything out. And so all those circumstances leading up to why you make a certain decision is all already determined beforehand. And if you can't change the past, then everything is already determined. And so their free will has to rely on those factors. The factors that already happened.
In other words, future equals all things that happened to you in past.
So all your decisions are already like predetermined or determined by a certain, let's say, pool of actions you've already done before.
This just sounds...
Wait,
Okay. I don't know if it's the wording, but it sounds like history.
I got
to me.
lost.
It's like, okay, everything happened, and then what's gonna happen now is based on everything collectively that happened in the past.
Yes, that's exactly what
That's exactly what it's
that's
saying.
exactly what it
That's
is.
just history.
So that's why when I was looking at this video, I'm like, it makes like
Yeah, 5 minutes.
sense that it happens, but it's not like it still doesn't exactly determine free will. But
Yeah.
that's their version of free will for Calvinists.
Oh, okay, so that's the...
Okay, now I really don't like them.
Yeah. So, all right.
Because it's like, okay, if you say that everything in the past determines your future and whatever will happen in the coming days, you're basically saying you have no like, what is it? What's the word?
I don't know. Steve.
You have no agency over your life,
Mhm.
basically. For whatever a free will that you have is all predetermined by everything collectively that happened already.
Mhm.
That doesn't make sense to me. Like it doesn't. So from my mind, it's like free will is your what is it?
Your choice.
Your freedom of choice, but then it's like it does have, your past does have influence, but I think also Isaac mentioned that it doesn't have complete influence on your decision.
Yeah.
It will impact it, but it will not influence the outcome of what you yourself choose, which is the ultimate thing that matters. And so by that logic, you can't just say that everything's already set. So then what the hell are you gonna do?
Yeah. So the problem is like exactly that. What gets a little bit worse is like the way that they introduce the idea of how God saves you, right? So this is additional to like free will. So Calvinists, they believe that if you are a sinful person, right, and you are continuously sinful and you're always prone to sin, right? That's their condition. You're a sinful person. There's no way that you are. So these are the conditions, right? Or I just read it out. So you can't understand spiritual things, right? And
Mm.
there are verses that back it up apparently. So if you're a sinful person, you can't understand spiritual things, and that's backed up by 1 Corinthians 2:14.
Can you specify on what these sinful things are? Because it's, so I can understand the argument if you say like the original sin that we came from Adam and Eve. But then you say sin in general, it's like if you say that someone is an addict, they can because of that sin they can never get out of it because of what's happened in the past. Like they're stuck in something. In order for them to overcome the addiction, they have to do something to get them out. So if you can't get yourself out, I mean, you just let that conclude for the rest of your days, you're just gonna be an addict for the rest of your life.
That's exactly why Calvinism exists. So because you are in this cycle, right? Because you are a sinful person, you will continue to sin for the rest of your life, and you can't stop it, right? And it's exactly like an addict, and that's their stance, right? So if you continue to sin, no matter what, there's no way to get out, right? And how do you get out of it? It's because of God, and God chose you to get out of it, and that's their stance. So the next few points is you're full of evil, right? As a sinful person, you're full of evil. Mark 7:21-23, right? And you don't seek for God, right? And that's in Romans 3:11.
Okay.
And as a sinful person, it's lawless, rebellious, unholy, and profane, right? 1 Timothy 1:9, right? And because you can't get out of it, do you know how to get out of it? It's through God, and that's when God chooses you, and that's how you get out of your sinful nature, and you get salvation, and that's their point of view.
I feel like this could have been a separate lesson itself.
I hate that.
Okay,
This could have definitely been like a separate lesson itself, especially given the time.
yeah, that's okay. So we talked a lot about Calvinism.
Man, I want to hear more about this, but we gotta go soon.
Arminian.
I was finally get on them, yeah.
So honestly, as I was searching up Arminian, they're pretty simple. I think, at least for me, their choices are pretty logical, and they make a lot more sense than all these like ideas that are kind of restrictions, these conditions that you have to like be required to do. So Arminian is very simple. God chooses you, right? Or God offers it to you. It's not completely he chooses you. He offers this gift of eternal life to you, right? The gospel. Right? And on your part, what do you have to do? On your part you have to just either accept or deny, right? And that's your choice, right? And there's a certain aspect of like, yes, all the previous stuff does influence you, but it doesn't mean that it's holding you down, right? And honestly, that's it. That's Arminianism. So you're free completely. There are certain ideas of like, so there are conditions also for Arminian, right? The main point is that, like you said, God has to obey by his first, I guess it would be the first like rule for himself, is that he gave free will to human beings, right? And he can't take that away. And that's the first thing. And because of that, he can't be like, all right, I'm going to choose you and you're going to be this person and you're going to be, I guess, in hell or or in heaven, right? And yeah, so he doesn't do that. He goes like, hey, I'm going to offer this and you got to pick, right? And depending on your circumstances, that's where you pick. Or outside of your circumstances, you can also pick, right? And that's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Honestly.
Very nice.
So the problem, so there's also, there's a little bit more, right? So predestination, so we just talked about salvation, part of the predestination portion, right? But there's also, what about the people that are chosen for hell? Right? So in this, or in the Bible, God says he chooses people for heaven, right? But if that's true, that also means that God has to put people in hell, right? So the next idea is this idea called double predestination. And the problem, so I don't like the term double predestination because it means that you're getting predestined twice, and that doesn't really make much sense. Or there's two predestinations, but that also doesn't make much sense. So it's called. It might as well be called, like, I was gonna call it reverse predestination, but that also doesn't mean that it's opposite of predestination. It's basically, if one portion of predestination is sanctification or salvation, the second portion of predestination is also damnation, right?
Oh.
So
Okay.
how does God choose those that are in hell? And if I've explained Calvinism and Arminianism enough, you guys can kind of guess what that means for double predestination. Calvinists,
If
God
they're
chose you.
if they're oh okay. Right.
God already
right.
chose you, and according to your circumstance, you decided on this, and now you're
Stuck with it.
you're stuck with it.
Gotcha.
No takebacks.
And in Arminian, you for whatever reason, your choice was that you chose to go against God, and chose that this is not something that I want. To better understand this, of course, I'll give you guys analogies. There's a total of, I want to say 3 analogies, one for each case, the third one being at both.
Mm-hmm.
So, so if, for Calvinists, this is an analogy for Calvinists. So if your parents really want you to be a pianist, right?
Well,
Pianist.
Pianist.
Nothing else. Pianist.
Okay.
I don't know what you
Whoa,
thought
whoa,
of.
whoa,
You're not saying that.
Well,
Continue.
He.
Yeah.
Oh, this guy.
Continue. I
This
heard
guy.
something
I'm
else.
gonna just let you know, as
Dude.
far as I'm concerned, the way I was taught to pronounce it was P.
Pianist.
no, it's
No,
pianist.
Yeah.
Yeah, pianist.
Have you never
No.
heard the movie
Oh,
called
what?
the what was it? The Pianist? That's actually, it's a really good movie. It's a really good movie.
Is that actually how you say it?
As
Yeah,
far
it's a
as I'm
really good
concerned, that's
movie.
actually how it's pronounced.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Pronounced.
Anyways.
When I first heard it, I was like, and I was like, oh shit, it's actually pronounced that way. So, it's
So,
okay.
yes. So, if your parents really want you to be a pianist, or a great pianist, or even some form of musical, anything like career based, right? But I put this as a pianist just because like it makes more sense with the their stuff. So, if your parents want you to be some great musician, and so they decide, oh, I want my kid to be this person, right? So they set certain goals and certain like criterias, even certain like restrictions on your life, so that you can fulfill this idea that they want you to be, right? So let's say at the age of 3, you start learning the piano, right? Or whatever musical instrument, and you practice every day, right? They put you in things like musical schools. They enroll you into like a high school for music. And then it comes time for maybe like college, right? Where I'm a little bit more free and I get a choice, right? You get a choice to become, I don't know, a pianist, or you become something else, maybe a doctor or
Accountant.
a YouTuber or something, whatever you want to do, right? That is your choice, right? Up until college, right? Okay, so when you're in college, you get this choice, right? You either continue to pursue this whole setup, almost this whole like play that your parents decided for you. Up until this point, you either become that, or you decide to be free, right, and become whatever you want, right? For a Calvinist, you become a pianist, right? Your choice is that because of all these circumstances, because you grew up learning piano, you've been through this every day for however many years, 18 years, 19 years, you become a pianist, right? Because everything was set up for you already, and this was your choice, and you decide to be a pianist, right? So for Armenian, it's the same setup, right? You go through all this, and so for when you finally choose, you can choose pianist or something else. And the choice for Armenians, they can choose either pianist or, I don't know, physics or something. And it wouldn't be illogical for them to choose physics or something that's out of the ordinary, right? But Calvinists, they can't choose that because it's not within reason. It's not within the premise of whatever that they already set up for them, right? In this case, they become Maybe he was guardless. Yeah. So yesterday I brought up the idea of Willy Wonka, because I was watching this like, I don't know, video essay on this guy talking about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and he was talking about how like in Willy Wonka there's a certain level of like it sort of like explains things like free will, and I think trust or something along those lines, but all I heard was free will. I was like, oh cool, that's cool. And so 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 I was like, so I thought through like Willy Wonka. So if you guys don't know the story of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, or the newer version in the 2000s, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So it's this boy, he gets his golden ticket, he goes to this factory with a bunch of kids, right? And this ticket allows them to go to this chocolate factory, or a candy factory actually, hosted by this guy called Willy Wonka. And so they get to tour the whole factory basically. And so there's a group of, I'm going to say 6 kids.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a group of 6 kids. And if you guys don't know the story, 5 of them end up not dead, but
Really messed up.
not really.
Fat.
I think, yeah, they actually do get really messed up. Yeah, I think in the end, they do get really messed up. But anyway, so...
I'm lying, it's 5.
Okay, well, some amount of kids and this one guy called Charlie, right?
Oh, yeah, Charlie.
And the importance is on actually Charlie and not really the kids, right? But if you look at the kids, and if you look at... so if you think of the kids and Charlie as us humans, and if you think of Willy Wonka as a god, right? Then you can see sort of like how Calvinism and Arminianism is actually influenced in this story.
Interesting.
So you're introduced to like some amount of kids besides Charlie. Well, you are also introduced to Charlie, but Charlie has to be separated from this group because he represents a difference from them. So this group of kids, they're all really selfish. They're from like really rich families, I believe, and they have like a certain attitude pertaining to their certain characteristic. So there's one girl that like really wants to be like the first in line, wants to be the first in everything, and she's like pretty self-centered. And so because of her, the way that she ended up was that she was the first to do something, and because she didn't hear the instructions, she got punished, right? And because of that, that sort of represents Calvinism because of these circumstances, because of how her attitude is, how her personality is, and how her upbringing from her parents are. She ended up in this place, in this spot, right? And she ends up, getting dropped into a hole where they collect eggs, I think. I think that's where she ended up. Anyway, she ended up worse than where she started off. There are other ones where people ate so much that they become big, or like they become a blueberry or something.
Yeah, there we go.
Anyways, it was a weird show, but because of all these circumstances, everyone but Charlie ends up being this, right? They become this punishment and this symbol, right? And so that sort of represents like Calvinism because they didn't get a choice. All of these were up to their attitudes, and all these factors were predetermined, right? Or determined. And so Charlie is actually the opposite of all these bunch of kids. He did do something bad. I believe he stole a candy, right? But he still had a choice at the end, right? At the end of the movie, he walks up to Willy Wonka, right? And his choice was either give this thing that he stole, this candy back, or he leaves with it, right? And for Charlie, he was a representation of free will, and how he gave back the candy, and instead he was rewarded with it. And he was rewarded with the prize of, I think, being the heir to the factory. And so...
He inherits the factory.
Yeah. So that was Charlie, and that, in its own sense, is Armenia.
Wait, so Charlie's background, was it like poor? Was he poor?
Yeah, he was poor.
Okay,
Oh,
gotcha.
poor.
he like
Yeah.
he randomly got that.
Bro,
So-
his family literally lives in one room.
Mhm.
Everyone. I think he lives in. His room is in that like small attic.
And the craziest thing about it is that everything was already like set up even for Charlie, right? But he still chose to give it back, right?
Yeah.
He, in the end of the movie, you learn that there was this guy, this guy that was working for Willy Wonka, right? And this guy actually gave. I think he gave Charlie the golden ticket. No.
No, so the evil guy, he basically goes around to every person who got the ticket,
Okay.
and he whispers to them, "Give me the never stoppable gumdrop candy, whatever,
Oh.
the thing that Charlie takes. To give me that, and I'll give you riches for the rest of your life.
Oh.
Because he's a competitor of Willy Wonka. So if he gets the thing, he can mass produce it and basically take down the monopoly.
That was the guy with the hat, right?
Yeah.
And the weird
He has a
glasses.
scar, and I think glasses too.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Then
Yes, yeah. So that's the like, if any of the child come out with the candy, they can give it to him, and they'll give. He's basically promising, if you do this, I'll give you a lot of money. And so that's the little devil on the side talking to you basically.
interesting. Anyways, that concludes my triple analogies. Hope you guys got that.
Interesting.
Because of time, I really want to be able to get over the rest of it, but I'll try to conclude the rest of the presentation. All right, so we come back from Predestination.
Wow, that was about
And-
30 minutes of predestination.
And I wanna say that-
That was like 40 minutes.
Yeah.
So yes, there are two views of Predestination, and Paul actually follows up really nicely, where he continues to encourage people. And despite all of this, I want to emphasize a couple of verses. So in verse 15, he says, "So then, brothers and sisters, stand firm and hold fast to the teachings we passed on to you, whether by word or by mouth, or of mouth or by letter." And so, Paul here actually alludes back to a couple of things, but I also want to use this for Predestination, where despite all of this, he still wants us to hold on to his teachings. And Paul's teachings is very simple. It's just the gospel, and if you believe in the gospel, you're already saved. And other than that, you shouldn't really worry about anything else. And that's why I started off the conversation on Predestination saying that it's not important for us, especially if right now we have a pretty strong stance on Christianity. And so, yeah, but also why verse 15 is important for his letters is that something that Stephen taught 2 times over. The whole thing with the end of times in chapter 1 First Thessalonians chapter 15, all right, and also
Chapter 15?
5, chapter 5. First Thessalonians chapter 5, and so
I remember that.
that, and also in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2.
Oh, right.
So this is all. So this one verse all alludes back to that, and he sort of says, despite all these I guess false prophets, false teachers, even the Antichrist that might come, just hold on to his teachings and hold on to what is already true that they already know, right? And that's verse 15, and so there's also some other verses. And in verse 17, another important thing is that he says, "Encourage your hearts and strengthen you in every good deed and word." This verse itself sets us up for chapter 3 and what he has to say for chapter 3. And in chapter 3, or in verse 17, he alludes to, or he mentions good deed and word, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he mentions good deed because a little bit of background is that these people were getting lazy. They were Christians, but they were getting lazy. And I didn't really do a good job in my teaching back in chapter 5, the later half of chapter 5. I believe. Well, there was a section there where it talks about how the people that were sleeping and the people that were awake, and don't be the ones that are sleeping. That's also another analogy for people that aren't doing good deeds. It's also
Verse 6 to 7.
yeah. It's also another analogy for idleness, right? Those that are sleeping, they're idle and they're not doing anything and they're being lazy. And so Paul is calling those Christians to stop, get hope. And so he's calling them to instead do good deeds. And he also emphasizes, or he puts in word right in there on top of deeds. Word is basically the whole gospel and what he has to say about that. And I think I've emphasized that fact enough. And Paul always emphasizes the gospel. And he wants them to continue to spread that message. And also in the first parts of chapter 3, he asked them for prayer, and he asked them for things like, hey guys, like, I'm still spreading the gospel in his own like area. And in terms of the Thessalonians, he still asked them for prayer, and he asked them to continue to like help or pray for his like his success, basically, his success in spreading the gospel. And he continues in verses 2. It says, and pray that we may be delivered from wicked and evil people, for not everyone has faith. So I didn't do enough background on this portion, but I'm going to assume that Paul was struggling with the people that are already wicked and evil, right? So I want to emphasize that this wicked and evil person or people isn't exactly sinful people, right? People that are already sinning and people that are sinners, right, are sort of normal, but he's emphasizing evil and wicked. This is different from those that are sinful. So why he calls them wicked and evil, it can be that they are literally like Hitler, or they are just deniers of the faith, right? It could be that. And that's why he's asking the Thessalonians to pray for that, and pray that he is actually able to overcome and sort of detach himself from these people. And in verse 3, he and he continues to encourage them and says that even though all of this is happening, even though in the previous chapter we talked about this Antichrist, and even though people are preaching that the world is ending, even though there are false prophets everywhere, he still wants to encourage them. In verse 3, he says, but Lord is faithful and will strengthen you and protect you from the evil one. Right? And a lot of this whole section that I'm teaching is actually just on encouragement and encouraging them to sort of fight against whatever that's going on in Thessalonica. Yes, that's the right place. And then like I said, section or verses 4 and 5, he continues to encourage them. He prays. He's actually pretty hopeful and confident in what God has to do for them. He's confident that God will continue to help them continue to stay in what Paul has been preaching to them. Because he says, have confidence in the Lord, and that you are doing well and will continue to do the things that we have commanded. So he continues to believe that God has a role in their life and that they will continue to do what Paul has already taught them to do. Yeah, and he finally concludes in verses 5. He says, may the Lord direct your hearts into God's love and Christ's perseverance. He emphasizes that God's love is always there, and that even Christ's perseverance, even through all these things, will still be there for them, and God is always there with them. I realized there's a certain section I missed. I don't really want to go over it because it's pretty much the same thing. Miss verse 14. He called you to this through our gospel, that you might share in the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ. But he's basically emphasizing the gospel here again. And like I said, the whole last section is mostly on encouraging them again, and encouraging and giving them hope that there's more to come. Yeah. And all of this is all backed up by the gospel. All right. Finally.
Oh, how long was that now?